Welcome back guys, how is everybody doing? In this video we're going to take a deep look into a cool game from 1997. After seeing our one and only Clint Basinger from LGR saying on his last video that Pod was one of his favorite games,
Pod, one of my absolute favorites,
I decided to run it on my Pentium MMX. The game ran fine and all, but I was warned that it had some quirks and that it can be run on the Voodoo. So this video is going to be a deep look into Pod, the futuristic racing game, how it runs purely on the MMX instruction set, if an overclock helps, and how does it run on the Voodoo? Well, we'll see. But before that, sub to the channel and take your mouse and do a little click on the like button for us. This is a curious game that I gave zero attention to before this week, but starting from its title, that is short for Planet of Death on a racing game, it tickles my curiosity. So Pod is a pod racing game that was released in 1997 by Ubisoft. As for reception, they struck gold with the MMX use. Intel alone bought 2.6 million copies to distribute with Pentium MMX systems. Pod is one of those games that's perfect to try on a Pentium MMX. As seen on the Moby Games page, it's the first game to utilize MMX technology, but curiously, they also say that it only uses MMX for stereo and Dolby sound effects. Well, that's what they stated, but not what featured in the Next Generation magazine article from 1996 about the game, that says that MMX technology is exploited in nearly every aspect of the game. It starts by mentioning the audio, and I have to say, the game does have great positioning stereo sound, but then it mentions the graphics and says that the sheer speed of the game is due to processing power of MMX. The article goes as far as saying the game's 30 FPS is directly related to MMX technology. Believe what you want, the game looks and sounds great. Personally, if I was to guess, I wouldn't say MMX has nothing to do with the graphics, as the game runs pretty well on softer rendering mode, giving you a decent playing experience without the need of an expensive 3D accelerator. The rendering kind of looks like an original Sony PlayStation game, and that console was only released in 1995, 2 years before Pod. Pretty good for a computer with no dedicated gaming hardware. Besides using MMX, Pod was also one of the first games to support 3dfx's Glide API, although the OEM versions of the game that were included in Pentium system did not support any 3D acceleration, but a retail 2.0 version of the game did, and it was optimized for the first Voodoo card. That gladly is the one we have here in this Pentium MMX, as seen on the linked video. That's enough jibber jabber, now off to see the game. The backdrop story of Pod is of a new planet called Io being happily colonized by humans, I suppose, when a deadly virus that looks like a fungus is released from the mining activities and somehow starts to destroy everything. I'm guessing this fungus eats metal and it's highly contagious. Most colonizers leave the planet, but some are left back and have to fight for a place on the remaining ship to evacuate the planet. And you guessed it, the spare place goes to the winner of the Pod Racing Championship. As for the game, you can choose to play single races or the championship that includes all tracks. On the championship, you can save the game in between races. There are 16 tracks on the retail version of the game and 10 to 12 tracks depending on the OEM version of the game you have. There are also 6 cars to choose from, and a fun feature is to customize the car's performance characteristics, and you can match that to your driving style. You can even go into a testing ground to see if your modifications had the effect you expected. For me, I don't brake a lot, so I took some points off braking power and distributed them to acceleration and speed. Okay, so how does it run on the Pentium MMX? Here it is. To me, the rendering style looks a lot like an original Sony PlayStation game. On this Pentium MMX 166 with 64 MB of RAM and a run-of-the-mill Trident 9440 video card with 1 MB of video memory, the game runs pretty well. Admittedly, it would be a bit more enjoyable if the game played a bit smoother. The Socket 7 Pentium MMX is known to overclock very well, and considering Pod is being rendered by the CPU, maybe an overclock will make a significant impact on the game's performance. Unfortunately, through some kind of hardware lock, I wasn't able to set this Pentium MMX 166 anywhere above 208 MHz. But anyway, that's a solid 25% overclock, and I want to see if that had any kind of impact on the game's performance. Although the 25% overclock gave us a 10 to 20% improvement, that's only 1 to 3 frames, and it isn't really significant. So now it's time to see what the 3DFX Voodoo Graphics PCI brings to the table. Well, what already looked pretty good now looks awesome. Textures are smooth, and as the tracks are very creative and with many details, it's easier to see the cars with the texture filtering provided by the Voodoo one. Having run a bunch of games in the system that you can see in the other videos, I have to say that this is the one that runs and looks the best. Not only looks pretty good, but the frame rates are really good and it makes the experience a lot better. So now that we have settled on the final system configuration with the Voodoo card, let's take a look at some of those tracks and cars, as well as listen to Dolby sound effects, a courtesy of MMX Technology. Alright, so this was a fun adventure through this awesome game from 1997. Now you tell me, what games did you enjoy from the late 90s? And that's gonna be it for today. I hope you got some useful information or at least had some fun. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, dislike if you're a terrible person that doesn't like games from the 90s, and I'll see you next time.